Okay, fellas, so what I was just doing was what I was planning on doing was removing the entire rubber carb and doing a how-to, like completely reinstall it and physically show you guys how to do that, as well as going over the fuel lines. I was doing this for a fellow YouTuber that's the owner of a D21 along with the Weber carb. But as I was removing the last of the nuts on for the studs that hold down the carb to the adapter plates, I realized and remembered that the last time that I did this install, the hardware that I got, the studs and the nuts, it was completely new. And the fit was so snug and so tight that I had when I was installing the carb. Normally when I had the studs that came with the kit, it was just a matter of sliding the carb onto the studs, and there was virtually no everything aligned pretty good. But this time around the fit was so tight that I ended up using I had the breather off, and at the top lip of the carb where the butterflies are, I put a piece of wood, something like a 2x4 or something, and lightly tapped on that to press down the carb onto the studs and seat everything evenly, so there wouldn't be any like misalignment or any damage to the studs or the threads or anything like that. And because they're on there so tight, in order to get the carb off of the that adapter plate that's sandwiched between the carb and this adapter plate, I would have to wedge a flathead in between the carb and that center adapter plate and try to pry the carb up, and that would, I'm pretty sure I don't want to do that because it would cause quite a bit of damage to the carb and the adapter plate itself. So unfortunately I can't do the rest of the of this tutorial. I can't physically take the entire thing off and then put it all together for you guys. So it's just kind of a bummer because I really wanted to do that for this YouTuber. But what I can do at least is go through the setup for the fuel lines, so that at least you guys can get that portion right. If we look at this line over here, it's what you would call, I guess it's called the feed line. It goes to the bottom of the fuel filter, and the top portion of that line feeds directly to this outlet on the fuel pressure regulator. I think there's, let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ultimately, there's 6 outlets surrounding. Well, technically 7 if you call this one that, but that's just the adjustment for the actual PSI. But technically there's 6 outlets that you can possibly use for your fuel hoses, but you really only need 3 of them. This one right here, again, this one's for the feed line it essentially goes from your tank to your fuel filter, and this then continues over here the other end, or the next outlet, and this end feeds directly to your carb. And the bottom line that's underneath the fuel pressure regulator is your return line. It goes back and feeds down back to your tank. The other two lines, I can get this in frame, or rather the other two outlets, one's right here and the other one is back here. And the kit also comes with these plugs that you can obviously plug those outlets with, and you want to use silicone tape on the threads. That way you don't have any fuel leaking from any of these outlets, or even your fuel lines. Another tip that's handy is, if you look at these clamps that I used, you want to use these solid type of clamps, and not these types of clamps that have those I'm not sure what these ribs or slits in them, because these types of, if you try to use these types of clamps on your fuel lines, it's really easy for them to cut into the fuel lines and crack them, and you'll have fuel seeping through those where those clamps are. I learned that really early on when I was first installing the Weber carb. But I'll leave this on here for just a little bit, just so you guys can get a visual and are able to hook up your fuel lines the proper way. So again, if you're doing this yourself, remember always to take photos before you remove anything. That way you know which actual out of these two lines is your return line and which is your feed line, and you don't want to get those mixed up. And so again, this line is that feeds to your into your fuel filter. You want that here on this outlet. And I would recommend getting a fuel pressure gauge. It comes in really handy. So if you need to dial up or dial down the your pressure, your fuel pressure, you'll be able to do that and get the numbers you need. And again, the outlet directly to the right of this one continues on and feeds directly to your Weber carb. And the line, the outlet at the bottom of the fuel pressure regulator, is your return line, and it goes all the way back down to your tank again. And as far as the orientation of the Weber carb, I actually did it what you would consider backwards, but I did that on purpose, partly because mostly because my throttle cable is really long, and if I was to orient the carb the proper way, where the choke is on this side, I would have had to do all these crazy bends on the throttle cable, and I just don't think that it would have worked out. And then I still would have had to have dealt with mounting the stock throttle cable bracket, as well as trying to figure out a good place to mount the return spring. So that would have been odd. So the only real downside to mounting it the way I did is that the studs, the location of the studs and the nuts, the other one is, hopefully you can see it, it's right over there, because the choke, and it's just the design of the carb. It was actually, again, it's supposed to be the other opposite orientation, but because I put it in this orientation, there's very little room to maneuver and get a wrench and a socket, or a socket into either one. You can, but it's just a really, really tight fit. And the turns that you can do are really, really small. This side isn't an issue. You got all kinds of room to do what you got to do to tighten those nuts. And as always, I would recommend when you're doing everything, use Loctite on your bolts and nuts. But again, the install itself, I wish I could have just taken the whole thing off and put it all back together for you guys, but you know, not a possibility. So, but anyway, it's really, really easy. If you look at the instructions, the bigger adapter plate is what you put on the intake manifold, and obviously between each of these things is the kit. The Weber carb kit also comes with those thin paper cardboard gaskets, so between each one you have to put the appropriate gasket. So after the larger adapter plate, and once you get that bolted down, then you would do the center adapter plate, and then on top of that would be the carb. And the studs themselves are what actually go on that center adapter plate. You'll see the threaded holes there for that. I'm trying to keep this as short as possible for you guys, and not make it longer than it already is. So I'll let you go. I'll let you guys go, and hopefully this kind of makes sense. Again, I apologize for not being able to do the whole process. It's a bummer, but anyway, I'll see ya.